during the gun debate, there's a lot of talk about background checks, right? About making sure that we're not giving guns to mentally ill people, people who might go into a building and kill a lot of people. And so I think first it's like important to name, yes, that kind of violence happens and it's really horrible, right? As abolitionists, we're not saying that violence and harm don't happen. We're saying, how do we create structures and processes that do not amplify and continue to build up this violence and harm? And then it's important to say this argument that people with mental illness, people with psychiatric disabilities and psychiatric illness are more dangerous than people running corporations that are profiting from war and people who are running the government is really ableist and also rooted in deep forms of racism. And then it's really important to think about, I was thinking the other day, the guns that are killing the most people are actually regulated and legalized. They're the guns that the U.S. Army owns. They're the guns that the NYPD owns. They're the guns that the Seattle police own. They're guns that people have had those background checks. People, anytime a bullet is fired from a police officer's gun in New York City, the district attorney immediately investigates it. What does it mean then to say, well, then we need more gun regulation when the number one predator, I feel like, for our community are the police, and every time they use their weapon, it is investigated. And so it really, I think, helps to dispel this logic that people with access to guns who are mentally ill or access to guns in non-legal ways are more dangerous. When we hold up who is actually using these guns to hurt our communities the most, and we're seeing that it's the military, it's the police, it's people who are guarding the borders, it's the paramilitary groups, then it really dispels that logic that mentally ill people are inherently more dangerous. And I think what that logic does is allow for increased policing of our communities, right? Increased policing of disabled people, increased policing of people of color, increased policing of undocumented people who wouldn't go through any kind of background check, for fear of many things, including deportation. So I think that really helps to dispel those myths and helps to illuminate who is invested in those myths continuing to occur, even in and be repeated, even in radical community, even in left community or social justice movements. Because I think some of after Newtown, Connecticut, after the shooting there were some people who were talking about, we need more money for people with mental illness. We need more, and I felt like pretty uncomfortable with that statement. We always need more support and services for people with mental illness and people with all sorts of disabilities. Everyone needs more support and more resources, especially communities that are navigating generations of disposability and exile and imprisonment and slavery and settler colonialism. All of us need more resources. But the idea that there's a correlation between a person being mentally ill, having a mental illness, psychiatric disability, and someone going and killing a bunch of people, I think is really dangerous. I think that is actually really dangerous, and allows for all sorts of policing to increase that's happening against our community already. And I think there's a parallel with, hate crimes legislation, right? The idea that more regulation, more police will help, this community. Just like more resources for mentally ill people will help, us have less violence. The logic of the state is constantly demanding us to think of ways to increase policing as a way to decrease harm and violence. And one way is hate crime legislation, and another is, increased, forced institutionalization of people with psychiatric disabilities. And I think that's something that really is illuminated with the gun control conversation right now.
Yeah, that's so true. The thing that you said about the most regulated guns are doing the most deadly shooting is really interesting to me. It relates to kind of a deep abolitionist point, which is that it's true that there's a lot of violence in the world that we're all scared of.
Right.
The problem is that the solution of policing and criminalization has no fit in reducing it and actually drastically increases it. And it's a very basic point, but it's so true. So then whenever something comes up that's terrible, like the Newtown shooting, that truly wouldn't have been prevented by a variety of things that are being proposed.
Exactly.
Whenever that comes up, people have the immediate response of criminalization. So it's like, let's do more mandatory minimum sentences for guns. Let's make it harder for certain people to get guns when, from what I understand, the majority of people in the United States who own guns are white men. And there's an idea that the kinds of background checks and things that are most likely to benefit them to get guns, right, like no criminal history and less likely to be psychiatrically diagnosed, is somehow going to make us all safer. When these shootings are often by white men, the mass shootings.
Exactly. And I think also, some of the same arguments for these forms of gun control, are rooted in black people post-slavery not getting access to guns, are rooted in indigenous people not having access to guns. I think that's really some of the same, this idea that, black people are incredibly dangerous, like post-slavery. This was something that was used to really justify the continuation of slavery and pseudo-slavery in many different ways. And some of those same arguments are still happening right now.
And the image of black people as incredibly dangerous drug users also goes back to that time, from what I understand. This ongoing set of drug panics that all focus on racializing black people as the most dangerous drug users that produce all these enormous, drug law reforms that do fill prisons and jails with black people. So it's interesting to link, I think, ideas about like health and substances and mental health. They all kind of go together with producing this dangerousness.